Welcome to the Wordy Pair Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Wordy Pair Podcast. As always, I'm Rudy.
And as always, I'm Justin.
And today we're going to be talking a little bit about writing in different, operating system environments.
Yeah, a good little environmental analysis.
Yeah, kind of talking about probably some of the recent issues with Windows 11 will pop up, and we'll talk about why we're thinking about making these changes, stuff like that.
Yeah. So, do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I've been interested in Linux for a long time as an operating system ever since high school, but I never really played around with it too much until I had to on a regular basis at work back at my scientist job, and they were using Ubuntu, and I found Ubuntu, at least the way they had set it up, to be incredibly painful and irritating and unstable. And that was like the opposite of what I had heard about Linux from everybody else up to that point. And so I was highly confused, right? It was like, this is like Windows, but worse. Not just worse in like the fact that it has a clunkier interface, but in the fact that it's less stable at this point, which I found surprising. And so when I, for my home purposes, decided to try to put together a Linux machine, I was like, well, Ubuntu is right out. I'm not going to even bother with it because not only is my physical experience with it suggests that it is not particularly good, but also some of the people who've been working on like GNOME and stuff had these really weird takes on like what the purpose of a software engineer is. Like the standout example is this one guy who was like, yeah, we're thinking about taking away the ability to put stuff on your desktop, because the purpose of a desktop is not to have things on it. It's just to be a pretty picture. And I was like, well, that's not your prerogative as the designer of an operating system or a graphical user interface. Your prerogative is to increase usability and not to arbitrarily decrease it because something or other doesn't happen to be a part of your workflow, right? And so I ended up...
comment on that before you continue.
Sure.
It has been the prerogative of the graphical user interface since... I was using a graphical user interface on a Commodore 64 called Geo's Desktop.
Yeah.
And there has always been demand for putting things on said desktop. I think Google Chrome was... or the Google Chromebooks were the first ones that were really like, yeah, we're not going to really use this desktop space, but you could still get things on the desktop if you fought with it a little bit.
Yeah.
And the idea that someone just like, no, this is supposed to be a picture, and you'll you know the whole point is it's right there. You can click on it with a cursor.
Well, it's a visual element. It's like having cards on a table, so you can move them around and arrange them like visually and by hand, as opposed to like having to look at like a list of things that are in some window that maybe moves around and is a different shape every time you open it.
Yeah, and I just have to say, as someone who used Commodore 64 computers more than, like the personal computer with a graphical user interface growing up,
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time having to type things in to access, like, I had to type in a directory command that consisted of 3 lines and then type in the word list and hit return just to look at the programs that I could access on a disk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and having a graphical user interface with a desktop that shows you what you want to see and lets you arrange things according to what you most need is not. There's no reason to look at that and say this should just be a pretty picture.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, it's like part of being a software developer is, especially for like productivity software, is to understand that different people have different workflows. And you might be right. You might be right that it's more efficient workflow wise to do this in a certain way. But that doesn't mean that it is your job to remove all the alternatives from other people and disrupt their workflow. It's like, imagine if there was a person designing a word processor who said, I use cut a lot, but I never use copy. So we're just going to remove copy, and it's just going to be cut and paste. It's akin to that.
Well, I think that's exactly what it is, because I think that somewhere along the line, a lot of people that like use Linux a lot and get really good with, say, all the keyboard commands, and they know the ins and outs of it. As they're working on it, they're designing it and they're like, well, this is what works for me, and it works really well. And I need to throw the other stuff out because, I mean, who else is really using the other stuff? So this is the way it needs to be. Well, and they forget that one of the reasons that Linux has trouble getting adoption by a lot of people, which at one point was the goal, if I'm remembering correctly, is like get people using it. The developers for Linux, a lot of them kind of got too into the tech moment of the thing and forgot that there were people out there that did want it for these other things that maybe they're not using. And if they designed it around that, there would be more demand for it.
Yeah, I mean, the distribution strategy that Linux has a lot of problems that prevent it from having really good adoption by a lot of people. The fact that Windows has kind of a social, like a social networking effect to keep it going, right? Everybody writes software for Windows, therefore everybody uses Windows, therefore everybody continues to keep writing software for Windows. I mean, these are real effects, and Linux having issues with the fact that it's so decentralized can make it harder to port or transfer software from one to the other. You might need a certain package, or you might want to have a certain package manager work on something, be used to install something, and this one uses Pacman. This one uses apt-get. There's all kinds of different things going on in Linux, and the range of compatibilities is one of those things that everybody is grappling with to some degree. But in recent years, it's been pretty well dealt with in a lot of ways, where it's like, you just do this thing and you can get this package on your computer. It's really easy, and it'll automatically update, and you can. One of the great things about Linux is that it's so customizable, right? Like, yes, you can download packages from your package thingamajig, but say that you like the current version of LibreOffice you're using and you don't want it to update itself because LibreOffice decided to do something dumb, just as a hypothetical. You can go in and you can say, when I tell you to update everything, ignore this in particular. There's all kinds of cool options with Linux, and that customizability is one of the things that is appealing to someone who, maybe not power user, but halfway to power user kind of thing. I've always liked the ability to adjust things to my own particular style, I guess, or my own personal preferences.
Yeah.
And the ability to do that in Linux is even better than it is in Windows, which is pretty decent in most cases.
Yeah, and actually, I was recently looking at what Linux build I would like to put on my laptop, and I started looking at a lot of the Debian stuff, and I was going through people's lists of like the top 10, the top 30, and it is actually, it can probably be pretty daunting to someone who hasn't used it before.
Yeah.
But they have a whole bunch of different setups based with Debian-based versions of Linux, and you can get a version that's set up specifically for people who want to program computers. And then another version that's specifically set up for people who want to run Linux on a very low processor intensive machine.
Yeah.
So it's not using a lot of processing power. They have they have versions that are meant for gamers. If you're interested in gaming, there's versions of Linux that are, this is optimized for you to play games on. And actually, that's another thing. You mentioned that Windows has that social aspect of it, that it's kind of like a positive feedback loop.
Right.
I don't think anyone has been more effective in the past 20 years at getting people to adopt Linux than Steam has by making Steam a Linux-based gaming platform.
Yeah.
With their Steam Deck. I mean, and it's not just the Steam Deck users that have adopted it. Many people have started building Linux machines for the sole purpose of running Steam on it so that they can play their Steam games on a non-Windows machine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not perfect, but I've actually run one before, and it's good. It's not, you can't run every single game that you'd be able to run on a Windows machine, but the ones that you can run aren't exactly the ones that people don't know. It's like you're talking the most popular games are working on all of these engines, and the ones falling by the wayside are the very obscure, like nobody's really going to bother to make this work on Linux kind of games.
Sure.
So there is that, and before we lift the veil and reveal to all the people that are here for the writing aspect that, hey, we're an engineering channel now. No, I'm just kidding. we should relate it to writing.
This is one of those things where I think that Windows is moving in a direction that is extremely, and a lot of the main software that people are using on, say, Windows are moving in this extremely dangerous direction where they want access to everything that you're doing at all times. And that can be the kind of thing that you don't want to necessarily provide to a giant faceless mega corporation as a writer, as a creator as any kind of creator, right? There was that whole brouhaha about Adobe changing their terms of service so that they were like, oh yeah, we can look at your stuff at all times, and like the language in it was really flumpy, and people were like, this looks really bad, right? Windows is doing the same thing with your privacy in a lot of ways, and this is one of those things that people, I think, finally people are starting to understand that their data is something that has value, and they shouldn't just be giving it away randomly to Microsoft, or
as I am about to do, Google.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can limit what things you give to Google, but I mean, you can your Chromebook will run without an internet connection. Is that right?
It will. There's very little you can do with a Chromebook without an internet connection. They are meant to be on the internet. But I'll get into that when I talk about what my little pet project is.
So, I mean, the point that we're making here is that there's a lot of reasons to try to get away from Windows at this point. And so one of the things that people who are also writers are a subset of the people who might want to get away from Windows. And so this is one of those things where, well, what works for you as a writer if you're trying to get away from Windows? Yeah, and Linux is a pretty good, as far as I can tell, Linux is a pretty good thing that you could possibly change over to. It doesn't have the three big ones, right, are Windows, Macintosh, and Linux. And Macintosh has the locked-in, hyper overpriced hardware problem. Windows has the, we're going to force you to log into everything at all times and update your computer without your consent and take all of your information and sift through it with an AI. And if the hyper expensiveness of Macintosh and if the hyper intrusiveness of Windows are starting to get on your nerves, then Linux is the obvious third direction that you can go, where it's like, okay, I can customize the system and I don't have to worry about stuff being updated without me being ready for it. I can create a system where I can have an almost Windows equivalent graphical user interface to do all of my writing and other artistic works. There are free open source versions of a lot of the programs that I would generally be using in a Windows or Macintosh environment. That there's going to be a learning curve, but I can accomplish most of what I want to accomplish with those. And so this is one of those things where you always have to usually you're not going to take your existing computer and switch it over, but Windows is going to make you switch over to a new computer anyway when Windows 11 comes out. This gaming machine that I built just a couple years ago is Windows 11 says, oh, this computer isn't good enough to run Windows 11. It's like, well, that's That's unfortunate because that means that Windows 11 is going to necessarily be filled with way more bloat than any operating system I'm interested in running is. So, yeah.
You know, expanding on that just a little bit, there is sort of an angle you can look at it. Like, if your concern is largely writing, which I would hope that some of the people that listen to this, that would be their concern. But let's say that's your focus. Like, you don't
Yeah.
need, we both play video games too, and so we like a little bit more power to our machines. And it would be nice to be able to set up a Linux machine that both allows me to write and play some video games here and there. But it's not a big deal. So the way I'm looking at it, just like from a pure writing perspective, I don't think it matters too much what you're using. I have future concerns, certainly, but the premise of all three of these methods of writing is that I want to publish a book, and once the book is published, it doesn't matter where I had written it. It might matter, like, okay, so I've got the file saved here, here, or here. But again, this is a problem that, like, if I were to right now take one of my books and store it on a hard drive, I would be able to access that book, assuming it's in, say, .doc or .odt format.
Mm-hmm.
I can access that on a Windows machine, a Linux machine, an Apple machine, and a Google Chromebook.
Sure.
All of those will read that file, so I will always be able to access that file and do something with it. And, even if we look at the worst case scenario, Microsoft locks down and becomes this online streaming, stealing your data, crappy interface that nobody wants to use because it's broken and forces you to use the internet and steals your data and runs on AI.
Yeah.
Apple could completely locked down to where they're only letting you use their file systems and so forth. And Google could end up in another antitrust lawsuit where they have to sell Google Docs. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, sure.
Linux is still there. And the only bad thing that could possibly happen to Linux that could prevent you from being able to access files that you have written. And keep in mind, this is still a scenario where it's like, okay, so you didn't take those files and update them when you started seeing problems. Let's say that we're just dealing with one file format here.
Mm-hmm.
You will always be able to build a Linux machine, with the exception of newer technology is actually being built usually with the big three in mind. So, like, processors are having hardware built into them that's meant specifically for Windows or Apple. And at some point, this will cause a lot of problems with people trying to run Linux. But you will still have access to decades worth of old computers that can and will be able to run older versions of Linux and access those files, giving you an option to keep the old, and you can still join in on the new if you need to, the new technologies that emerge. But you have to consider, like, how far in the future these things are. Is it 30 years from now that you might not be able to show anyone a book you wrote because the whole world is digital and the certain file format is just gone?
Well, I mean,
you never had any way to really.
I mean,
30 years is a long time.
There's never going to be a 30-year pause.
Yeah.
Between version 1 of your book and version 2 of your book, where you didn't publish it in between. I hope, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this isn't something like life or death. The bigger concern that I would have is
but the point is that when you're doing something like writing, something brain intensive on a computer, you should be comfortable while doing so. And if it were impossible to comfortably write on some platform, then you'd say, well, yeah, you can write on this platform, but like it's going to take you a lot longer to get anything done. You're going to waste a lot more time and energy trying to get anything done. It's like the complaints that you had about writing on an Android phone compared to how you were writing perfectly well on your BlackBerry, right?
Yeah.
Some systems are set up in ways that make it actually harder to get work done, and that's what we're trying to help people avoid.
Yeah. So if you're wondering how this is about writing, well, here it is.
Well, yeah. I mean.
And there's a lot of things to watch out for, too, though, because Windows is slowly moving to this platform of, we are going to advertise to you. We are going to force you to kind of be online as much as possible in order for Windows to function.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't remember where I heard this. I don't remember how true it is, but I think there's functions in modern Windows where it's like, if you're not online for a certain amount of time, they'll be like, hey, this has to be online to get an update or you can't use it. I am online all the time with this computer, so it doesn't really, I haven't seen that myself.
Yeah.
And I don't remember where I heard that. It might have been something that my brain made up because I heard several things in conjunction, but Windows is moving in that direction. And the funny thing about it is Windows almost seems like it's trying to become a beefed up version of a Google Chromebook, where you're always online, everything is stored online, and the system becomes more and more proprietary as time goes on.
Yeah.
And that seems like a bad move, considering the reason people adopted Windows so heavily is that social aspect of it, that you can make a lot of different things for it, and you can do a lot of different things for it. And if you can't do that anymore, and you just become a glorified version of a Chromebook, well, a Chromebook is, I mean, I'm doing an experiment to see what it's like to write a book on a Chromebook, and to possibly try seeing like how much better the environment in Google is to put out a book, get it in a good format, get it published, and even do a little bit of marketing with it.
Yeah.
And it's all, this is stuff that isn't really processor intensive. You only need very basic stuff to be able to write on a laptop. I mean, these things have like 4 to 8 gigs of RAM in them. You're not running any video games or anything, and I'm pretty much going to try using Google Docs.
Yeah.
Which I wrote most of the good guy in Google Docs, so I have used it, and the only bad thing I would say about it is that I always had to be online in order to write. It wasn't stored locally, which I'll get into in a minute. And after I wrote about 1/3 of the book, I had so many slowdown issues with the story loading, and when I was trying to edit, that I had to migrate it over to OpenOffice in order to be able to finish it, because Google just couldn't keep up. That might not even be an issue nowadays, because this was years ago. But still, these are things that I'm going to be experimenting with, and I'm going to see just how viable it is to do this. But even then, I'm moving my methodology to one of getting my writing done. I will do it in their online little environment, but I will save offline copies, and I will export every time I'm done with a session a dated copy of everything I'd written up until that point, as probably either a docx file or maybe even an EPUB.
Yeah.
Just so I have it in a format that is easy to access from anything else. I'm more concerned about things going wrong. There have been horror stories about people who have been in the middle of a book and they lost all of their data because their account was banned for one reason or another.
Yeah, we mentioned this a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
This happened to a person who was writing a rather risque romance novel, and somehow it like triggered some kind of a spam alert that basically locked them out of their account. There was a series of articles about this. I think one of them that we saw was on Wired. And this person had a particularly difficult time getting Google to give them back access to the stuff that they had written. And so this is one of the things I don't understand about like the Chromebook trend. Like local storage, especially enough local storage that you can do, basically a glorified text file and all of the version control for that glorified text file. Seems like it's so cheap that there's no reason not to do it on a machine that, in a disconnected from the internet way. There's no reason to put that in the cloud, because, it's not like you're making extensive gigs and gigs and gigs of video where the cheapest and easiest way for you to store it is to put it up on YouTube as a private video or something like that, right? Like,
there is one reason.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it's the underlying philosophy of what a Chromebook is. The idea of the Chromebook was always meant to be, a lot of people say that, okay, so these are for people who just want to go online and they want to be able to do, have a little workspace and connect to the internet and maybe even just watch a bit of YouTube here and there. Just a very simple machine for people who just use computers for the internet. But there was another underlying aspect that I want to give a little praise to Google for it, but I also want to say that I'm not sure how much I like it, just because of the fact that it Google leaned towards putting everything in a cloud system.
Yeah.
And that aspect is that the benefit of a Chromebook is if something happens to your Chromebook, or if you decide to update, or if it's stolen, you have immediate solutions to that problem. You buy a new Chromebook, and they're dirt cheap, compared to most other computers.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is sign in with your email, and you have everything that you lost right back with your account with your new Chromebook. You don't have to do a bunch of USB hard drive swaps to get your stuff moved from one computer to another when you buy a new computer. And that's kind of the idea behind them, and I think it's a good idea. It's just that there's a lot you can't do with that as well, which is why I was never really seeing myself switching to Chrome from
it's one
Windows.
it's one thing to use the cloud proactively.
Yeah,
I'm in favor of that. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does not make sense that you cannot just say, I want to make a document offline and save it locally.
That's the problem is when these cloud services kind of not necessarily restrict, but make it more difficult to make local copies or make local backups or do your own version control. It seems like this is another case of someone removing something that, people do use because they don't use it and they think, oh, well, nobody needs this.
Yeah. And it's even worse with Google because, I mean, my discovery that you actually had to be online just to use Google Docs, that it was so infuriating when it happened because I had saved a bunch of, you could save stuff locally. You could make a Google document that was stored offline and local to whatever you had it on. I believe I had it on a phone at the time.
Yeah.
However, for some inexplicable reason, you had to be connected to the internet to view your offline documents. And I struggled for a long time to understand why anyone would do that. And the only thing I could think of was Google just always wants you to be online to be able to use things because they don't. Maybe it's a case of they just don't want to deal with the difficulties of having things sync up. But I mean, this is a problem that Steam solved almost right off the bat. It's like, oh, your game is offline. It's not going to sync properly until you connect to the internet. It's like, okay, no problem. Just click a button and let me go. Google couldn't handle that, apparently.
Well, I mean, Google's a much smaller, organization than Valve. So.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Just this minuscule little... I mean, what are they, a search engine? Pff, okay.
I mean, search engine, a web crawler.
Yeah, now. I guess they always were, weren't they?
I'm not sure, but it's a funny joke.
Yeah.
We've outlined a bunch of reasons why you might be wanting to move away from a Windows-based system to something else. And we've explained why you might not want to move in the Macintosh direction, namely price. If you're, an author, you probably don't have, unless you're in the D tier and above, you probably don't have a bunch of money to waste on Macintosh software and hardware. So, you probably are going to be looking for something cheaper. And Linux is a really good way to go cheap. You can get a inexpensive refurbished business computer for, you can get them as cheaply as $100 or maybe even less if you're willing to really, really scrape the bottom of the barrel. And you can put a small footprint version of Linux on there, put on LibreOffice, put on, Inkscape and GIMP, and you can do all the formatting and writing and even a little bit of mild photo editing on this computer that has practically no power compared to anything that you're going to go to Best Buy and pick up as a desktop or even as a laptop.
Yeah, for $150, you can pretty much guarantee that you can build a laptop meant specifically for writing that will not run slowly on you just by having Linux on it.
Yeah.
And that's just the cost of the laptop. I mean, Linux is free. All the software that you named is free. So your whole setup cost is just buying a laptop and making sure you have a download of some form of Linux to put on the laptop. Which, if you don't have one prepared, may mean that you have to buy the laptop, use Windows to do that. But
you
then
can use whatever you want to do that. But
well, I mean, if you buy a laptop that has Windows built into it,
yeah.
But I mean, there's lots of refurbished stuff. There's lots of stuff that, I mean, you can go to there's a Disc Replay near me that sells old laptops for $100, and I've put Linux on a few
I always
machines
just go
now.
to eBay and just pick up, because there's a huge industry on eBay of just refurbished business computers being sold, and they're tested, and you can choose whether it comes with a monitor, or you can look for laptops, and it has a lot of really good guarantees behind it, because eBay is a pretty mature marketplace at this point.
Yeah, I bought a lot of really good stuff off of eBay, and compared to buying from Disc Replay, I would say eBay is the way to go, because I've also bought a lot of stuff at Disc Replay, and I've gotten Chromebooks that had USB ports that didn't work because it took me about a week to figure out that, someone had crammed in a USB stick and broken the end off, and so now nothing else can go in this USB slot.
Wonderful.
Most of the stuff you get off of eBay isn't going to be like that. You usually find pretty good... I mean, I can't remember...
You can find used stuff that's in bad condition on eBay, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But if you specifically look for refurbished business computers, you're going to find basically... someone took this machine, it's mildly scuffed from a couple of years of desk work. They put in a new hard drive, they made sure that the monitor works, they made sure that it has a new battery, and they ship it to you. And they guarantee that it's not broken. And if it is broken, you can send it back.
And so if your sole concern as a writer is being able to write, being able to save documents locally without having to deal with all the cloud nonsense.
So here's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's not just about saving things locally. You shouldn't just save things locally, because you can always have a catastrophic hard drive crash.
Yeah.
The point is that you should be able to save things in multiple different places. And if you're limited to just online, or if you're limited to just, on that particular machine, then you might have problems. You want to make sure that you have, a USB slot that you can hook a thumb drive up to. You want to be sure that you have, it might even be just a wired internet connection, but, you want to make sure that you have an internet connection so that you can put your stuff up on, some kind of cloud service periodically to make sure that you don't, that your house doesn't burn down and you lose everything, right? Like there's, part of what is important about working, on a digital environment like that is that you need to make sure that you have backups. And whatever system you're going to work on should make it easy for you to do backups.
Yes, and this is actually, this starts to get a bit closer to my little experiment that I'm going to do. So,
yeah,
I've got 3 books I want to write. I'm going to write them on 3 separate devices. So the next book I write, I'm going to do on a Chromebook. I'm going to see what the experience is like. The book I write after that, I'm going to write on a Linux laptop. Mm-hmm. I'm probably going to be running some version of either Linux Mint or maybe the Debian build of Linux Mint.
Okay.
And because I've used Mint a few times now, and it basically comes packaged with all the software I need to do everything I want short of VTubing, which...
Mint seems really easy to use and pretty stable.
It is. It's very stable. First time I booted it up, I was able to figure out everything without looking anything up, and I looked at the... it's got that little start menu that Windows doesn't like having anymore. So
yeah,
I open up the applications and I'm like, oh, what do we got here? It's I've got a full word processing suite. I've got I think it was LibreOffice. I've got I think GIMP came pre-built into it. It had Python ready to go, so I could start programming if I wanted to.
Yeah,
there were a whole bunch of things that it just had. It had a media player. One of those things that Windows used to have, that you didn't have to go searching the internet for to be able to
yeah.
No, Windows Groove is not good. I'm sorry,
never used it. I used Windows Media Player a lot back in the day, but Media Player was always like a partial solution.
Yeah, and actually Windows Media Player was my go-to for a long time.
I used it for music, for music a lot, because it was it made it very easy to rip CDs and get the information for the CDs off the internet.
Oh yeah, it did at one time. You can't get the information for the CDs anymore, though.
No, I know. Well, you can. It's just harder.
Yeah, but it's not like automatic. You have to actually, do the workaround to get it. But I just remember it's like the first time I put a CD in, and I was like, "Wait, where's the button to get the information?" Windows always had the button to get the information. Why don't they have the button? And so I had to go download VLC, which I think VLC is probably just my go-to for everything at this point. So it's my music player and my video, like my DVD player and all that.
See, I use Media Player Classic.
I still have Media Player Classic.
Or technically, I guess it's technically MPC BE now, because Media Player Classic is defunct. But
yeah,
I mean, back in the day, back in the old fan sub days, it was hard as hell to find something that could run all the different codecs that you needed. And the versions of VLC that I've tried to play with always were way too bloated. But Media Player Classic seemed to work pretty well and incorporated the codecs that I needed.
Yeah, the only reason I like or VLC so much is because it's on everything. It's on Linux, it's on Windows. I think you can get it on Chromebooks at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to investigate that. But yeah, you can build a simple machine for writing that doesn't cost you much, and you can sit there and crank out books, and usually that machine is powerful enough that you can probably watch some YouTube as well if you want.
Yeah.
You can definitely look up information for your writing if you need to. It'll definitely be able to access Wikipedia or what have you.
Dictionary, thesaurus, etc.
Yeah, all that fun stuff. I mean, I've done some good stuff with very cheap laptops. I have an old HP, I forget what they're called, like Webbook or something. It's not a netbook. Netbooks are atrocious. Don't bother with netbooks.
Yeah.
I tried running the most basic form of Linux I could find on a netbook, and it was still sluggish. It could not handle it. Yes, stick with dirt cheap laptops with a couple of years on them, and you should be good. But yeah, I have an HP that was like $90, and I was able to get Linux Mint running on it, and it ran pretty smoothly. It was able to write okay. It wasn't necessarily able to do graphical stuff all that great, but I wasn't, that's not what you buy it for. If you're getting cheap laptops to write, that's not what you're doing anyway.
Well, I mean, you want it to be able to handle making a cover and stuff like that. Like, we do have to have at least that functionality. There is some level.
It depends.
It
depends on if you're actually the one making the cover or not. But even then, a $90 laptop running Linux with what's that really lower end, not GIMP, but the lower end art program. I think is it Inks? It's not Inkscape, is it?
I mean, Inkscape is a thing, but it's
maybe
not like
maybe
low
that's
end.
what I'm thinking of. I mean, there's paint programs that you could easily make a book cover on Linux.
Sure.
I don't know how we got into the whole cheap aspect. I mean, our point here isn't just that you can do things cheaply. It's also that you can escape.
The reason we got into the cheapness is because most authors are not giant moneymakers to, buy like a really, really expensive computer to do writing on, right? And that's kind of where we're ending up, is that like you might need to have a hefty computer to play games and do stuff like that. But that computer is also going to be constantly sifting through everything that you do and showing you ads and stuff like that, right? And so like the reason that you go cheap is because you have this other computer and you don't want to spend too much money on the second computer, but you just get something that can run the stuff that you need, and you don't have to worry about Microsoft sifting its dirty little fingers through all of your data and showing you ads randomly.
Yeah, that's the thing that gets me the most. I mean, my Chromebook does not really show me ads everywhere, whereas Microsoft seems to think that that's a feature I want. And, God forbid we get to the point where I'm in the middle of, VTubing and an ad pops up in the middle of my screen that's being picked up by OBS. And it's just like, oh, thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, everyone that's watching wants to know that there's a new feature for Microsoft Office 365 and a sale on donuts. Thank you.
I mean, I'm into the sale for donuts.
I am too, but not when I'm trying to enjoy a game online with friends.
That's fair.
So, what are some of the problems really? Let's get into the nitty gritty here. Like
Well, problem
what
number
are our
one is learning curve.
concerns?
Problem number
Well,
one is learning curve.
no, not with Linux. Like, what are our concerns here with Windows? Let's look at a couple of
Well,
different points.
I mean, it's incredibly bloated. It requires a more and more powerful computer to just be an operating system, which seems insane to me, right?
Right.
Like the computer that I'm using right now is not cheap. This computer that I built to play video games on and play, decent video games on, I didn't spend like $3,000 on it. I didn't even spend $2,000 on it. But I was somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 on it when I built it. And that was only a couple of years ago. And, I get this pop-up every couple of months that Windows is like, hey, Windows 10 is, reaching the end of its lifespan, and you're going to need to upgrade at some point. And for some reason it says, oh, your computer can't run Windows 11. And if this computer can't run Windows 11, then Windows 11 is not worth running.
And as someone who's been using Windows 11 for over a year now, 10 was better, and Windows 11 is practically not worth running. Like, if something happened to my computer, I have a license for both 11 and 10. I would install the license for 10 and just hope that it wouldn't force an update.
And so, like, that's one of my concerns, is that Windows is just getting too big for its britches and too bloated and just wasting a bunch of my time and money. And so I want an alternative. I want something that doesn't force me to have 32 gigabytes of RAM and a 10 gigahertz processor with 8 cores for the operating system alone. That's nuts.
Yeah, and I just don't think the best people are working at Microsoft anymore to build this stuff. I think that after too long of being browbeat with like, okay, you've got good ideas, whatever. This is this is our brand. This is what we want to do with our brand. This is what we need you to make happen. And it's just like, at some point you realize you're not being a computer engineer anymore. It's like, all right, I'm out. You've made my job too difficult for nothing, and I don't need to be here anymore. And let's not cut corners here. Google never did have the best. They've had so many projects they've dropped that it's ridiculous at this point. And now it seems like they're banking everything on their Gemini and Workspace, which, we've talked about AI before and where all that's
Google
going.
is another one of those really, really acquisitive companies that, you never know what they're going to do with your data.
Yeah.
When I say put backups somewhere on a cloud, I don't necessarily mean leave them in their original format. You can create like encrypted packages that you can put your data into if you don't want Google to be able to look through it. And you can put that up on Google, or you can put it up on Dropbox or any of the other providers of small amounts of cloud space. But like, if you put something up on Google, Google's going to look at it and they're going to do God knows what with it. Hopefully you have, hopefully they'd never go so far as to like actively attempt to violate the copyright of someone who's written something and put it up on their platform. But, you never know at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that may be a small concern that some people might have. I mean,
it's not a realistic concern, but it's one of those things where it's like,
But the more realistic concern is that, we entered an age a little over a decade ago where people started using these gigantic platforms to decide who and when they're going to censor people.
Yeah.
Google could at any time be like, well, this person doesn't write books that are politically favorable for us, so we're just going to terminate your account. And too bad if you were in the middle of writing a novel or whatever. And I could see Microsoft doing the same thing. I could see any of the social media platforms doing the same thing if you use them for a business. I could see Apple doing the same. I mean, Apple probably has and will never even know it because, who would even bother talking about Apple at that point if they did that to them? And it's like, whatever, I'll never use you again.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a genuine concern, and Linux kind of circumvents most of that because even there's a lot of really shady people in charge of a lot of Linux operations right now. And even though they may be the exact type of people that would do exactly what I'm describing here, they don't have as much power to, because Linux is open source software that you can basically go back to older versions anytime you want, put them on any machine you want, and there's nothing that the people that are in charge of, say, the Linux Foundation or Oracle can do about it.
Right.
And all of that software was built in ways where, they don't have access to it, and you can actually run it without being connected to the internet, and there's nothing anyone can do about it short of a global EMP blast that takes out all electronics.
Yeah, I mean, getting back to something a bit more,
Yeah.
realistic. I mean, the point is that if this has been the kind of thing that's been itching at the back of your mind for a while, you'd be surprised how good and how easy it is to get something like a Linux machine running these days. You could even do a dual boot with your, on your Windows machine, just to kind of dip your toe in. But I mean, I think that probably, unless you're super strapped for cash, the best way to do it is with a cheap dedicated Linux system.
Yeah, you got to experience it that way, just to see if it's like, is this how I want to operate things that I work on?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, realistically, if you spend a little bit of time getting to know it, again, there's going to be a learning curve, a little bit of one, depending on which distribution you choose.
Honest to God, there's almost no learning curve with Linux Mint.
Well, that's good.
It's like having an install of like Windows XP or and it's more up to date than that. I'm just using XP as like the closest thing that it resembles.
Okay.
And it does everything that I need it to do, with exceptions of very extreme cases. Like, obviously you're not going to be running the stuff that's meant for Windows on these machines.
Yeah, but not a whole lot of software is meant for Windows these days.
Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, I guess my point is that it's, you might decide that you don't want to go into Linux Mint for whatever reason, but like, whatever it is you're going to do, you're going to have a little bit of a learning curve. But then you're going to find that these days, a well-built, solid Linux machine that hasn't been tinkered around with by some tyro too much is going to be about as comfortable to write on as a Windows machine.
Yeah, and they're developing.
I think that's the bottom line here. Is that if you're going to make this switch, the time to do it is a little bit before you feel like you have to, right?
Yeah.
That way you could ease yourself into it a little bit more slowly. And so, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where once you learn it, you kind of know it, and it's a relatively small investment, both of money and of time, but it can protect you from these giant companies deciding to be jerks all of a sudden for one reason or another.
And you don't have to worry about not being able to go back either. Like, if you have a concern that you might write a bunch of stuff, and then what do you do if you decide to go back? The file formats are pretty universal. So you can save stuff on a Linux machine in .doc format for Microsoft Word.
It's just LibreOffice, right? LibreOffice in Linux is practically identical to LibreOffice on Windows.
Yeah, and
there are a few user interface differences that come from the fact that part of the way that LibreOffice operates is by using some Java bits, and those run a little bit differently on Linux from what I've seen in Windows. And there's a little bit of clunkiness there introduced, but not much. It's not as bad as it was 10 years ago, where things were kind of funky looking and like they never quite looked right, and they looked different enough that you kind of lost that, oh, this is familiar feeling. Nowadays it's pretty close to identical. Yeah,
there's one more peace of mind aspect I'd like to put out there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you're worried that this is all, it's a bit too technical for what you want to do, just keep in mind that you are probably the more technical person when it comes to setting all this stuff, and it's like what you want to do with it and how you want to customize it. I am fully on board with, when I want to work on something, I want a device that will let me work on it without any hassle, which is why I'm doing the Google Chromebook experiment to begin with. I want to see if, I don't like them very much, but is it a good environment to where I could just open this thing up and start working on it, and I have no problems? Like, I'm not going to have any problems like I've had in the past on Windows with moving files around and getting the formats right and making my backups.
Right.
I'm the kind of person that wants to just sit down and do it. I was able to do that on Linux. All I had to do was get a machine, get Linux on it, and I was good to go from there. And if you can't be bothered to put Linux on a machine, which is you can look up YouTube videos for it. You can, as you mentioned, buy pre-built machines right off of eBay that come with an operating system installed. And usually you can dig around in the details of the sales page to find out exactly what install is it and what does it give you that you might need.
Yeah.
So this is not something that you have to be computer savvy to be able to do, is my point. You don't have to worry about that.
If you go with Mint, or Ubuntu or one of those easier installs, it really is pretty darn simple. You can literally find a YouTube video of doing it from start to finish and just follow those directions for the most part. I mean, there are some distros that are much more complicated to actually operate with, and those are going to require a little bit more digging, and they're going to require you to have a working machine so that you can look things up as you get it running. But
sometimes your phone suffices for that.
Kind of, sorta. A lot of the stuff is on these giant, long wiki articles that are really hard to read on a phone. But yeah, there are hard ways and there are easy ways to do it, and you can just choose one of the easy ways because they're pretty convenient.
Yeah. Yeah, the only reason I'm not going to just order a Linux laptop from the internet is because I have a perfectly good laptop that should do the trick right here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's usually pretty simple. I don't know. I mean, again, it's going to depend on which distribution you're using. The one that I use, you put an image, you get a program that works in Windows, you download an image, you put that image onto a USB stick, you stick that USB stick into the new computer, and you format the hard drive, and you put the new operating system on it and stuff like that. And it's not really that difficult. Although it did take me a couple of tries to get it to actually run when I was doing that. So,
I mean, it's really not any different than if you've ever done a fresh install of Windows on a computer.
It's a little. It depends. Again, it depends highly on the distro.
Yeah, I guess it also depends on the version of Windows, because they did actually streamline the install process for Windows 11 pretty.
Yeah,
I don't want to say
it's pretty dumb.
Yeah.
At this point, it's pretty darn foolproof.
So I don't know. This may or may not have been a good topic for anyone interested in writing, but
I mean, it's a bit of a technical digression, but it's one of those things where you as a writer often are not thinking about these things, but like somewhere at the back of your mind you are. You're like, man, I hate the way Windows has been going. Man, I hate the way Windows has been going. Man, I hate the way Windows has been going. And that's kind of running at the back of your mind, and part of that is like it gives you discomfort as well, right? This makes it less comfortable for you to write because you have this stupid loop running in the back of your mind that's like, man, I don't like this. Man, I don't like this. And so, I think it's helpful for people like us who are not super high technical operators of this stuff to say, hey, it's actually not that hard to get rid of that stupid voice in the back of your head.
Yeah.
Get yourself acclimated to some, relatively simple Linux distribution, or try a Chromebook. Maybe we'll have more on that in a few weeks or something like that. But, it's about as easy now as it's ever been. And
let's look at the absolute fail-safe. I mean,
yeah.
Let's go ahead and say if it's absolute paranoia you're dealing with, buy a notebook and write in the notebook, and when you're done, type it out on the computer.
Well, I mean, that again, you're talking about a niche within a niche within a niche within a niche.
Well, no, it's actually worth bringing up though. It's there are a lot of people out there that seem to have trouble working in environments where there's like even a modicum of distraction. Windows is a very distracting machine to try to write in. That Windows will notify you to death if they get the chance.
That's true. Yeah, that's one of the advantages that I've had with my Linux machine is that it is much easier to just sit down and just write on it because there aren't a bunch of random programs on it that I can play around with. I deliberately didn't install like all of my, quote unquote fun bookmarks to, sites to visit and waste time at. So like, when I get on that machine, it's time to get stuff done. And it has some nice features too. Like, I don't know. I think Windows is trying to do this, but like, as far as I know, my Windows 10 machine does not have the ability to have multiple workspaces. But like, even my Linux distro has multiple workspaces, so I can like have one workspace to actually do the writing on, and then have a second workspace that I like keep track of the progress of my writing on, if that makes sense. And so I can separate those two things so that they don't distract me being on the screen at the same time kind of thing.
Do you mean like multiple desktops?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so Windows 11 does that. I wasn't aware of whether or not Windows 10 did.
Yeah, I don't know. If it exists, it is not there something that you can have set up by default. So, like, maybe it's there, but I have to dig through the control panels in Windows, which has become more and more of a chore these days.
Yeah, I don't know why they decided in 10 and 11 that the things we've been using for, since the 90s, it's like, we got to change this.
Well, it's so that they can sell new training seminars.
That actually sounds right.
That's exactly what it is.
There is multiple desktops that you can create on Windows 11, and up until like maybe a couple of months ago, I didn't understand the point of them until someone started explaining workspaces to me. You've seen my desktop, that's not how I work, so I was never really into them. But you have that option on every device that I'm aware of now. Apple does it, Google does it, and Linux does it, and I think Windows likes to think they're the one that invented it, but it seems to me like Linux was doing it a while ago.
Yeah. It looks like virtual desktops are a thing on Windows 10, but it's not obvious how to get them working.
Yeah, they made it a little more obvious on Windows 11 because I accidentally did it, and I was like, wait, what just happened?
Right.
Yeah, it was like my desktop just disappeared, and I was like, did some crazy Linux programmer decide that I don't need things on my desktop anymore? What happened? What's going on?
Yeah.
A little bit of humor to kind of stroll out on this Google Chromebook attempt that I'm going to do. It's very timely. So I don't know if we've mentioned my curse before. I know we did on other channels, but I don't know if we've done it on the Wordy Pair. I have this curse. Should I describe it, or would you like to take a crack at it?
Go for it.
All right, so it's well known within my group of friends that if I like something, especially if I like it a lot, it's going to go bye-bye. This includes like my favorite snacks from the snack aisle. If I find some pretzels or something that are delicious and I want to buy them all the time and keep eating them, the company that makes them will just stop making them.
Yes.
And this has happened so much that my friends actually took notice, culminating probably in the moment where we were at a sushi restaurant that I had never had good experiences with, and everyone else loved the sushi restaurant. And we went in one day and I had a meal, and they jokingly said, "So what'd you think of that?" And I said, "Actually, this was a really good meal today. I liked this. I hope that next time we come here, I get a meal this good again."
Yeah.
My friend calls me a week later and says, "You said you liked that place one time and they just closed." I think that was my favorite one of all. So this is a known thing that happens. And I mention this because I'm getting ready to do this Chromebook thing, and I'm fully willing to say, hey, A+ if I get a good experience writing, and I think that it's viable to use one of these cheap machines to work on, and just have like a really easy to use, non-distracting writing environment.
Sure.
And this is, I decided to do this almost at the exact same time that Google ends up losing this antitrust case where apparently they're going to have to sell Android off or spin it off into its own company.
Uh-huh.
And this is right after they created the Chromebook Plus line, which is a version of the Chromebook that also gives you access to the Android store.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Meaning that if I give this thing a good review and I say, you know what, I actually like Chromebooks, after all this time, it may just be the thing that destroys Chromebooks.
Well, that'd be wonderful.
It actually, I mean, on the one hand, it kind of would, but see, I can't lie about it either. I can't just say, I really love Chromebooks, and then they'll disappear. I have to actually like them. So,
right.
So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But I swear to God, if I give them the thumbs up, and they disappear the next day, there's no argument anymore. The curse is real.
Just, if you decide to give it a thumbs down, let me know so I can buy some Google stock.
Yes, I will make sure to do that. You just cut me in for 10%.
Yeah, you got it.
Does this count as as insider trading?
This is not insider trading because neither of us is an insider at Google. We're only
an insider for the curse.
That you have magic powers over Google.
Well, no, I don't. My tastes do. Like specifically the things that are not
Your
exactly.
tastes are a part of you, yeah.
But they're not in my control necessarily. Because
That's true, but like at the same time,
a nice humorous note to go out on. So
yeah, that sounds reasonable to me. All
re-
right,
reflect
well,
on my suffering.
a little bit of a technical digression this week, but I mean, it's important to. I think it's important. I think the real takeaway point for writers is that you should be comfortable using the device that you're using, and if you're not for any reason, then it might be a good idea to try something else. And I think both of us agree that the way that Windows is moving these days gives people an ample reason to be uncomfortable working on a Windows machine.
I think so.
And,
Yeah, I think
and,
that
and entrusting it with personal, important data, and therefore, if you don't have that voice in the back of your head saying, "Man, Windows is starting to suck," then by all means ignore this episode. But if you think as we think, if you feel as we feel,
oh my god,
then it might be time to try something new. And the technical requirements for doing so are incredibly low these days, and therefore, if that's what's been holding you back, it might be worth a try.
Yeah. I guess one more mention. Years ago, I started to look at it like this. I started to see Windows as the platform where I like to play my games and I like to do the things that I know I can't really do much of anywhere else. Like I can't. I know people have done it. It's a much more technical process on Linux. I wouldn't want to have to try setting up my VTubing thing through Linux. It functions well in Windows, and it's not a hassle to do on Windows. And having to relearn all of it and possibly get into the really technical side just to be able to do it on Linux is not a reason that, I'm not going to go out and build a high-end Linux machine and learn all of this stuff just to do what I'm already doing here. However,
right.
The more I use Windows these days, the more I look at pretty much every other option except Apple as this is a better way to do my work. My writing, my artwork, my...
I mean, the other thing about Windows, right, is that it has a lot of security vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah,
and so like even doing like personal finances on a Windows machine might be getting to the point where it's like, do you want to do that? And so like you can move all that stuff over to your Linux machine because that also is not computationally intensive.
Yeah. You want to kind of look at everything like, okay, well, what do I need to get the work done? And I'll admit that I'm one of those people that tends to overbuy for what I need. But I've always looked at it as like, always know when you're overbuying. Sometimes you just want that extra for fun. That's what I did with this computer I built recently.
Sure.
But I know that all I really need in front of me is a laptop and maybe a mouse to make editing easier, and I'm good to go on writing. And even then, it's easier if you're going to publish digitally. Obviously, you have to have some kind of computer to type things up on. But for as much as I like typing out stories, I'm a really fast typer, so it makes sense for me to use a computer. To this day, my favorite way of writing has always been pen and notebook, writing in a notebook. And that's probably because it was the only thing that got me through high school and college. I've got a notebook and a piece of paper in front of me, and I don't want to do the stuff that's in front of me, especially in high school. So I'm going to write some stories. And even in college, it was like, okay, I'm done with all of this stuff, but I have to be here for another 2 hours. I'm going to sit here and write a story, whatever. Notebooks are actually really fun to write in, and if people enjoy them, I do recommend, write in that notebook and then just type it out later. It's not a big deal.
But we can talk about that another time.
Yeah, we'll do a notebook episode. I'll go back and write a couple short stories in a notebook and describe the experience after several years of not doing that.
Well, I mean, I use maybe not necessarily a notebook, but I use pen and paper to do all of my outlining. So
I don't outline, so it's either story or nothing.
Yeah, sure.
I use pen and paper when I'm studying things all the time, and that's still satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, I think we'll call this an episode.
Yeah, get Linux.
Get Linux. Just get something that you're comfortable on, right? That's the thing. Is that if there's anything about Windows that's making you uncomfortable, then it might be worth trying something else, because you don't want to be uncomfortable as you're writing. You want to have something that makes it easy for you to just get in and get some writing done and get back out, without having to worry about all kinds of crazy stuff. And that's what alternative operating systems can possibly do for you, depending on how you feel about Windows. That's kind of it. Anyway, as always, this has been the Wordy Pair Podcast. I'm Rudy.
And I'm Justin.
And we will see you all next week. Have fun.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.